All right, good Monday, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to today's Info2Go webinar. This event is brought to you by the Idaho Commission for Libraries with funding and support through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They're also often known as IMLS. They have been in the news a lot lately, so you might want to look it up. Today's session is being recorded, and this recording will be made available in our Info2Go archives that are located on the Idaho Commission for Libraries website. My name is Tammy Hollyhouse, and I will be your host today along with my colleague and tech guru, Dylan Baker. He is helping us out today. This is the first day that we have used Zoom for one of our webinars, so our fingers are crossed. But let's get to the important stuff, and I would like to introduce you to our guest presenters today. They are from 4 public libraries across the state of Idaho. With us today, we have Chambray Emero from the DeMary Public Library. We have Gretchen Casarati from the Meridian Library District, Kate Loven from the Middleton Public Library, and Leanne Gelsky from the Haley Public Library. So we will turn it over to you guys now.
Hello, everyone. So first, we're going to start by telling you why we're here, which is because we all attended the Research Institute for Public Libraries, and we wanted to share all of the vast amounts of information that we got there. So first thing, the Research Institute for Public Libraries, or RIPPLE, was launched in 2015 by the Colorado State Library and the Colorado Library Consortium as a singular event for public library leaders and others who are interested in public library data and evaluation. In this immersive bootcamp-style event, participants learn practical, strategic methods of gathering, analyzing, and using data for planning, management, and communicating impact. One of the really fantastic things about RIPPLE is that what you learn there can be used by anyone, from even the tiniest one-person libraries all the way up to those really large library systems who have, dedicated data management people. The information is presented in a way that makes it accessible and useful right out the gate. And it's structured in a way that kind of builds on itself from the opening keynote all the way to the final wrap-up project. Our event began with a keynote from Felton Thomas Jr., who discussed the concept of making decisions that are data-driven, data-informed, and data-inspired, and what each of those kind of meant. And then the following 2 days offered a mix of breakout sessions and speakers where we learned all the hows and whys and nitty-gritties of gathering and using data to inform our decisions. And then on the final day of the event, everything we learned was pulled together in this big culminating activity where we worked in teams to help the fictitious Crystal Springs Public Library get a $1 million donation from this crazy awesome guy by analyzing community data and then creating a sales pitch for how we're going to use those funds. And then we all got to vote to see who used the data the best. It was a lot of fun. During the event, each participant was given a journal where we could not only take notes, but we were encouraged to reflect on what we learned, like how it might be used in our libraries, what challenges we might experience in implementing those things, and what the next steps should be for what we learned. There was a great deal of emphasis on putting the information we learned into practice. They wanted it to not only be, something we learned, but something we actually use. And so that carried through even after the event was over. For the next 6 months, we got weekly email reminders that kind of reviewed each of the topics that we had covered, and little, encouraging notes for us to continue to use the resources that we got there. I absolutely encourage everyone to attend a Ripple event at least once. It's definitely worth the cost just for the sheer volume of information and the support that you receive from all of the facilitators and presenters. And for me, at least, it was also a really great opportunity to see how libraries of all different sizes from all across the country were making a difference in their communities. And it was just such a wonderful event. So definitely encourage everyone to go to them. So with that said, we will get right into our presentation where Gretchen will start us off.
Yeah, thanks. I concur. It was an excellent conference that I took a lot home for and to use. So let's see if I can figure out now how to get back to advancing the slides. There we go. All the participants were asked to do some homework. We had to come prepared with a project that we were going to work on, an evaluation, a data collection project. We had to frame it in a simple statement, a description of what it was, and then answer these two questions, or create a problem statement and a statement of why. What is the question that needs to be answered, or the problem that needs to be solved? And why does the library need this answer to be solved? And what will we be able to do after we have this answer or solution? So what I'm going to talk to you about in my section today is a couple of just high-level things to kind of start us off with. There it goes. With thinking about data, with the life cycle, with thinking about how we identify the information we want to, the problem or project we want to work on, how we plan to gather information, how we actually collect the information, how we analyze the information and use the information. And that should be an ongoing cycle, which you'll see why as we come to the end of my section, talking about something that I was most excited about learning from this conference is called the logic model. Rebecca Jones from Dysart Jones, I'm having troubles with my little teeny tiny arrow. So Tammy, I may have you do this after all. There we go. Can you go back to, looks like we're both doing it. This is the slide, yes, okay. So the Rebecca Jones from Dysart Jones talked to us about the logic model, which is basically starting with the impact in mind and working backwards to design services toward that end goal. So it takes a lot of planning and good assessment design if we're going to start by asking that question, what problem are we trying to solve? So following this formula can help us strategically get toward what those community-based impacts we hope to see are. So the logic model is a framework that goes beyond documenting what you did and measures the difference that you make in the life of your target audience. So what has been that positive change in their behavior or in the community somehow? And in order to do so, oh, I'm sorry, I'm really struggling with these slides. We want to start with our stakeholders. My slide has disappeared. Oh, did you download these, Tammy? Because I changed some slides. Okay, I'll wing it. So we want to start with our stakeholders. Before you get into the meat of this framework, you want to be able to really understand who your stakeholders are, who are going to understand the value of your services. Is it your library board, your city council, your chamber of commerce, is it a grant funding agency? And then you also really want to understand what your strategic goals and your objectives are, both from your stakeholders at strategic goals and objectives, as well as your own organization's strategic goals and objectives. And then you can better articulate how your services work toward those goals and those objectives. So the logic model really works within the framework of input, output, outcome, and impact. And so your impact is what we're starting from and working backwards. So that's the stakeholders' perspective. What do they want to see as a change in the community or the individuals within a community? What do those decision makers want to see? Working backwards, your outcomes are your user perspectives. So what comes out of it for the patrons? What are the patrons, the library patrons, going to be able to do? Or what's the change in behavior Your outputs are essentially what you're collecting. That's your data. That's your measurements around your operational perspective. It's what you deliver. It's the number of programs or the activities that you're putting on in order to get to the outcome and the change in behavior. And your input are your resources. So that's what you put into it. That's what resources are required in order to enact this initiative or this program. And so those four categories sort of work all in concert together when you're building out this framework. So an example that might be really common for libraries would be like computer classes. Your inputs for a computer class would be like you're offering a space for this activity to take place. You have staff that are putting on this program. You have computers that are being used. Your outputs is what you're measuring. So your program attendance, the proficiency in a software program that you might be teaching Excel or something. You might have a curriculum that's created that can be shared and replicated. Your outcome, your user, that's where you're kind of wanting to find out, well, did they actually increase their skills? Is there any kind of a change in behavior? Do they actually like computers now and they didn't before? And then your impact, of course, is what that larger, bigger picture community outcome is desired to be, which could be, it could be lower dropout rates for high school students or college students. It could be, in this case, an increase in employment rates or something. And so that's sort of the overview of if this, then that. And I found that while the slides here are kind of just linear in their design, it's been really helpful for me to actually put this in a table. And actually we use that at the conference to actually kind of write out these categories and fill in these boxes so that you can be clear on what your desired impact is. But I found that through the process of writing them out, it helped me identify gaps as well as where we had misaligned activities, things that we were doing that maybe really didn't actually serve toward that larger goal or to those outcomes and impacts. So at the conference, I actually used an example of our Kindergarten All-Stars program as the project I wanted to assess. And what was helpful to me in actually articulating these categories and really writing this all out was I realized that we really hadn't talked about a major piece of getting us toward the desired impact of kids being ready for kindergarten was the parent engagement. And while I think we kind of took it for granted that that would be a part of it, we really didn't talk about any way to measure whether or not there would be a change in the behavior of the parents who participated in the program with their kids. So when I came back, I thought it would be helpful to get the other managers' perspective on this. And we actually did some course correction and we added in a parent survey as a part of this program. So we were already assessing the kids and we had an intent to measure IRI scores and these other metrics, but we really didn't have a tool in there yet for parents. And now we have a survey that has been designed to make sure that we're gathering the parent engagement on that program. I'm going to lose a lot of minutes here just fussing with the slides. I apologize. So the data trifecta is sort of these three pieces of it. The phrase was just catchy in my mind to help me remember these three things. If I can always hold fast to what a community impact is, we can kind of walk backwards through inputting these three categories. Actually, because my slides don't match, there's the thing I just said. So for the Kindergarten All-Stars program, we had the inputs of what the resources were that were going into this program. We mapped out what our outputs were, what were we going to measure, and our outcomes in looking at what our goals were with that program. Is kids being ready to read at the end of the day is the impact. So, yay. So the logic model is a way for us to think about defining what success looks like in our library's activities, initiatives, summer reading, or adult reading programs, or computer classes, or anything. So if you define what success looks like by articulating your outcomes and your impacts, what you want, then you can walk backwards to say, how will you get there? And that is your input and your outputs. So it was really valuable framework for me that I took away from this conference. And one of the things that I think is really helpful about this from working in a library where we really feel we are at limited capacity is that this can inform our choices about where we put our resources. The phrase that a couple of us loved was ruthless prioritization. By building a framework and actually doing the knowledge work, the strategy work of considering all of these things, we can make some really smarter decisions about how we allocate resources in our library that really are in service to our library's strategic goals and our community's desired goals and objectives, our city and community members. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chambray, who's going to talk a little bit more, and the other folks here about some different tools that we learned that could help us in whatever framework we might choose to apply. So Chambray, I'm let you take over the screen.
Okay. So once you have outlined the problem that you want to solve, and the process you want to tweak, or whatever your big goal is, the next step is to gather all the data that you need. And since this information basically lays the groundwork for whatever your final solution is going to be, it's important to consider what the most effective method is for getting the data, as well as what sources you're going to get it from. So, oh, sorry. There we go. There's a lot of different ways that you can gather data to make decisions. Quantitative data can be obtained through a variety of different sources, anywhere from the census website to the annual reports that you do every year. Some states have data centers that have information like what median household incomes are, percentages of single-parent families, employment rates, and even the education level of parents. And all of those can, depending on what your problem is, help inform what kind of services might best meet the needs of your communities. And depending, again, on what kind of problems you're looking at, even like your monthly statistics can give you all the information that you need to implement the best services and programs. The qualitative data is a little bit more complicated to get. It takes a look at how your stakeholders experience the library. Surveys, interviews, focus groups, and journey mapping are just a few of the methods that can help us better understand our community and patron expectations. Oh, where'd my mouse go? There we go. Maybe? Okay. So let's take a look at the first couple of those that I mentioned: interviews, focus groups, and surveys. Each of these methods has a different pros and cons, and which one you use will depend on the level of data that you're trying to get. Surveys are primarily close-ended questions, whereas interviews and focus groups tend to be more open-ended with the types of responses that you can get, as well as it's more easy to clarify the responses that you get from those surveys. You know, I at least have had some surveys where I get them back and I'm like, what are they talking about? I don't get it. So with interviews and focus groups, it's a great way to ask them that, and to also kind of delve into their answers a little bit more, because sometimes you get some surprising answers. Surveys also allow you to get a large amount of responses relatively quickly, where interviews and focus groups tend to be more time intensive for both participants and researchers. A good detailed interview can take maybe an hour, and that's not even including the time that you'll need to review the responses and code them and turn them into some form of usable data. Another benefit to surveys is that they're anonymous. So people tend to feel more open about the things that they say to us. But interviews are more personal, and you can, and with focus groups especially, you can add to each other's thoughts and bring up points that perhaps one person might not have thought about otherwise. So they each kind of have their benefits depending on where you want to go with it. Yeah, this whole slide thing is very interesting. Okay. So when you are, let's look at how to conduct a good interview and focus group next. So when you're inviting participants for one of those things, it's important to include a variety of users and non-users, male and female, different economic levels, ethnicities, and even depending on what you're looking at, perhaps people who are differently abled, because everyone experiences the library in a different way, and everyone brings something different to the table. One of the tips that we received at the conference was when you're doing interviews, you should record them. It's also really, really helpful to have someone else sit in on the interview with you, because if you're anything like me, it's really hard to take good detailed notes and listen and respond in a meaningful way. So having someone there can be really, really helpful. And it's also really important to let the person that you are interviewing know that what is said is, just between the 2 or 3 of us, and that any recordings are just for research purposes and won't be shared, because that is a concern for some people. While you are doing the interviews, make sure you listen to how the story is told just as much as what they're actually saying. People will put emphasis on certain things, or they might laugh at something. And those are the moments that you kind of want to grab onto and explore more deeply. And that leads to the next point of be open to unexpected information. Sometimes the interview will take a slightly different turn than you originally thought it would. That information can end up being just as valuable. Like if you wanted to interview to see, what kind of programming you have, but the person brings up something about your computer usage, and that, it's not something you planned, but it ends up being a really great thing for you. And then finally, when you're all done with all the interviews, you get to code for patterns and meaning. Coding is something I had never heard of until I went to this, but it makes perfect sense. It's a way to analyze the responses, to look for patterns and key phrases that keep coming up, and that's helps lead you to where you want to be. So here's some of the process, I guess, for coding. You start by reading through all of your transcripts, which takes some time. And then you'll reread it and go through and look for, all the key things. For example, if you did some interviews on makerspaces, the words that might pop up would be things like creativity or collaboration or things like that. And then once you have all of those highlighted, you kind of put them into topics. And then from there, you can map them visually to help kind of make sense of where everything is. And then finally, the last piece is to convert it into something meaningful for you and your stakeholders, whether that's just a simple chart or an infographic or however you want to do that. But that's, if you want to know more about coding, because it is a little bit, it takes some practice. There's some additional readings down there at the bottom of the slide that can kind of help get you started on that. So the methods that we've talked about so far have all been very structured and scheduled for getting your data. So next we'll touch on a few unscheduled methods of collecting. The overall structure of these is going to be very similar to interviews, but they're generally a lot more brief and primarily take place inside the library, whereas interviews and focus groups can and sometimes should be done outside of the library. In these ones, directed storytelling is kind of like a shorter interview that allows you to explore how a user experiences the library. You ask questions like, you know, tell me about the last time you used the library. What was your motivation for doing so? Or what was the worst experience that you've had with the library? And that can help direct you to, you know, your customer service levels and processes and things like that. And this can be used in context with journey mapping, which is a really, I guess, detailed story that the person tells and highlights some of their highs and lows of their journey at the library. And these are especially useful when you're looking at issues of, you know, customer service or how they are relating to like the programs that you're doing. And then finally, the last one is customer intercepts. And those are just super brief little interviews, often as the patron is going out the door, just a quick, hey, how are we doing sort of thing. And those in many ways can be just as important as bigger ones because they're fresh and in the moment. So when you have an experience, it kind of dulls over time. You can't remember all the details, but when you're just fresh off of it, it's a lot easier to say, you know, this was really wonderful, or hey, maybe there was a couple things that might need to be improved. So those can be really useful when you're looking at smaller pieces of data. So how are we using it? Well, my library has started jumping on the bandwagon of customer intercepts. I've found that they're actually a really useful tool for getting information about some of the programs that we're doing. We've started a couple new things, and we hired a new children's librarian. So it's been really interesting and useful to be able to get on the spot in the moment feedback for that. So that's all about data collecting, and I believe we will now hand it off to Kate.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about Lean, a system for looking at how well we do what we do. It comes out of manufacturing, and it is kind of systematic in that. And it looks like my screen has now hopped to a very large version of Chambry, which is lovely, but I can't see the slides. Tammy, do you know? Did anything change in the way the slides are displayed? Can you hear me? Can anyone hear me? Did I get lost?
I can hear you, Kate.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I will just go through my slides then, I guess, because I'm not seeing yours now from the Google document. So if you look at the House of Lean, which is my first slide, that kind of gives you a picture of all the tools that are possible in the Lean system. The goal of Lean is that we do just what's needed, nothing extra, in the minimum amount of time, and we do it when it needs to happen, using the minimum amount of material, labor, and equipment resources. The comments are entertaining. Oh, there are the slides back. So if you could go up one, Tammy, I'm back. I'm still back on the House of Lean. Okay, so it came out of manufacturing. So if you think of a production line where they're producing some sort of widget, you want to have constant supply. You want to keep everyone busy. You don't want any bottlenecks. You don't want anyone to end up with too much stuff. And that's the way things go the fastest. And when I first applied, so after going to Ripple, I decided to go and get certified as a green belt in Lean. And when I first contacted them, they're like, well, what would you do that has a production line? I'm like, librarians absolutely have a production line. We process books. We order the books. We get the books in. We cover them. We stamp them. We put stickers on them, and we put them out. Or we check in books, and the books have to be checked for damage. Then they have to be put on the cart. Then they get reshelved. There are a number of different processes. So my library has gone through this process of doing Lean, and it's been very, very helpful. The two aspects of Lean that I'm going to address today are waste and process mapping. And these kind of go together. So if we can move on to the next slide. Waste is defined as anything that we do that doesn't add value, that might add difficulty, time, and work. It can be something that interrupts information. And of course, this is something that we want to get rid of. And so the next slide is the different forms of waste. So when we jumped into doing this Lean process in my library, we started to look at our materials processing system. And what we realized is that we absolutely had number one, waiting. First of all, our ordering was not even. Sometimes we had stuff for people to process, sometimes we didn't. Then sometimes the person who was doing the cataloging would do a whole bunch of cataloging in one day, and then they would be waiting for more stuff to come, and there would be too much stuff going to the processing people who would then get overwhelmed, and we didn't have a good place to put it. So we would go from one office being overfull to the next office being overfull to not having enough carts to move the stuff. Then once we started addressing that, we started looking at how much processing we were doing, and we cut down on the number of stickers and stamps and that sort of thing. We really didn't have a problem with rework or errors. We really didn't have a problem with overproduction. Overproduction would be like if we had just been buying too much stuff. We absolutely had a problem with motion. We were carrying things from station to station. Things were moving back and forth between two different people multiple times. And it was just causing a lot of extra work. We had pages who were trying to work on public tables. They would go get things on a cart, and then they would move to a public table, and then they would have to get all the stuff out, and then they would have to put all the stuff away. So we were able to create a station for them, and that really helped. The inventory goes back to the waiting. We had to make sure that we had the correct amount of inventory. One of the benefits of going through this process is last summer we actually ran into a problem where we did a big promotion on our children's nonfiction during summer reading, and we didn't have enough stuff on the shelves. We got emptied out, which is a great place to be, but we needed to get our processes down so that when we saw demand for something spiking, we could address it. We simply couldn't process and get things through fast enough to meet the demand as it started to ramp up. The waste of intellect is defined as if you have people who have higher level skills who could be doing more complicated things, getting involved in other things. And that was definitely a waste we had as well. When things got all wonky with our processing, my finance manager was jumping in and processing books because she wanted us not to have this problem. But really, that's not the best use of her time for my library. And then transportation, I suppose we had that just in the carts, but we aren't a big enough system to take anything anywhere. We aren't putting things on trucks or anything of that sort. Okay, so the next slide. So the tool that I'm going to talk about, which I would say out of the whole group of lean tools, all of which are really interesting and useful, this one has been the most useful for us, is process mapping. And then we'll go on to the next slide. So I borrowed this slide from Gretchen, and she did a really nice job of just defining why you would do process mapping and what it is. Basically, we're going to draw pictures of a process so that we can see exactly how one thing moves to another. It makes the work that we're doing visible, and we can see who is a customer to whom. And that was really telling for a number of our employees, that our customers aren't just our patron. Our customer is also the next person downstream who has to deal with things. So if the ordering doesn't happen, then the customer that's immediately affected is the person who's doing the cataloging. And if the cataloging gets done in an uneven way instead of a similar amount every day, the person who's immediately affected is the staff that's processing. And this allows us to look at how we're spending our time and make sure that we're doing it well. So next slide. This is a slide that came from the woman who did a presentation on lean at Ripple. And this is an actual process of how something was happening in a branch in Arapahoe County Libraries, or I think it's just Arapahoe Library District. This particular branch, I believe it was taking them a month to get books checked in, at least some books. Patrons were upset, things weren't happening. So she went in and she looked at the way they were running their processes, and everyone was working really, really hard, but so many people were involved and things were going in all different directions. They had multiple carts. They couldn't tell which cart was new and old. It was a big mess. So on to the next one. After they went through that process, this is what their process looked like. They were able to say, okay, what are the basic things that need to happen here? We need to get the book, we need to check it in, we need to be able to see in our physical environment where these things are so that things get checked in order. We may have decisions that we make, and then this is the process we go through. As we move on, I'm going to share some of our process maps that we were able to do. This is from my library. We've had two things that have happened from drawing process maps. First, we were able to kind of straighten out that whole processing process, or getting materials processed. But there were some side benefits other than just changing the way we do things. By drawing these out and posting them in the different work areas, we were able to empower our junior staff. So we were having a problem where, for example, in our next slide, you see that we have our donated book process. We were having people who really didn't feel comfortable looking at a donation and saying what we were going to do with it, because they didn't know where the decision points were. And so what this does is, A, it lines out the process so we make sure we don't have 3 people involved. And we also make sure that one person isn't holding all of the decisions and then getting behind. That was a situation that we had where someone was really passionate about book selection, and so they were holding all those decisions. So we can see that there are multiple different points where people can make decisions. We give the information so our junior staff isn't running back and forth and saying, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? What we realized is, while it seems very clear to us how we're making our decisions, they really weren't clear on that. And so we have made these processes, we post them in different places in the library, and anyone can now look at a donation and get it to the right place. And I have quite a few of these. If anyone's interested in them, you can email me, or we can post it at ICFL. I'm happy to share how we do these things and kind of how our process is. But probably one of our biggest efficiencies has been really empowering everyone to do a lot of stuff, because most of the stuff that we do at Middleton isn't really hard. It just requires contextual information, and it requires a lot of memory. And we just need to set people up and scaffold people so they can be a part of things and do things well. So all that said, we cut our processing time in half. It was amazing. We became more efficient. Really, our staff is happy. They're enjoying knowing exactly what to do and having things be very explicit. And we have people who really feel proud of the fact that they're able to contribute more because they know more about what we do and why we do it. It's also made it a lot faster to train them because it's like, just do this thing, follow this chart. So for us, the Lean has been really very, very useful. Process mapping has been a big part of that. And that's about it. So we'll go on to Leanne.
Leanne, do you want to take over the screen share or do you want me to keep doing that?
If you would like to do that, that would be great.
Oh, did Tammy just take it? Great.
Maybe.
Tammy took it back over. All right.
I did, and thank you so much, Gretchen, for jumping in there. You're
All right. What happened to me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Oh, I'm in control. Woo! First of all, I would like to thank the Idaho Commission for Libraries for sending us, and you can tell how knowledgeable and how much we learned from my fellow colleagues. So thank you for setting up the rest of this for me. I'm going to be sharing today about how I am telling my library story as a result of all of this that you've heard. I think that some of my other colleagues have jumped in a little bit deeper than I have. I started by putting together some different graphs. If you'd like to advance me, that would be great. So my question to you, as I did to myself when I got back from this conference, is how do you share your statistics? And if you're like me, I was creating charts and wordy reports, and so I have an example of what I did. So the next screen, please. This is a report that I gave to my board on the annual report in 2017. It's boring. Please say it with me. It's boring. So what I did was I took the same information and looked at how I was presenting it. And so for this year, when I created my report, you can see on the next screen what I did. This is using PictoChart. I have another person here on staff that likes to use Canva, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I started with PictoChart, which I really, really like. It's an online free service just for the basic stuff. I didn't purchase the premium. And I just started playing. And so I like what I did here. I thought it was fun and interactive and easier to share. But it was also starting the process of telling our story, which can be hard. We're really good at gathering all of those statistics, but we're not always the best at being able to share this. So I've taken a lot of information, putting it into this report, and it's also something that I can use at other places to tell our story. So I've shared it at Rotary. I know that we've shared it at Kiwanis as well to be able to tell our story based on the statistics that we gather. And you'll notice that there's not all those words. It's not wordy. It was my first, so go easy on me. I liked it, and it was well received by the board. I did have to be mindful, though, when I sent it in an email, that the parameters of it were not conducive to one of my board members because she has an older computer. So just be mindful of how you're sharing that as well. The next slide shows my monthly report. This is one that I did for November. Again, it was utilizing the same style and still using pictograph. One of the things that we really, that we learned at one of these presentations is that you have to remember to put your numbers in context. You have to be able, when you're sharing a graph, so if you refer to this upper left on this chart, you'll see that I have a circle. It's easy to see and it's easy to read that what I'm trying to share with those stakeholders, the items that were added and the items that were deleted. So you want to choose the appropriate chart. You don't want to get too fancy if you're only going to share a couple of items, like the items added or items deleted. You want to simplify and establish a focal point. So I've got a couple of different focal points in here. The top obviously being what it is. It's my director's report. Thank you. That's a nice cursor. Another focal point that I had was the website visits. That's on the right in the upper corner. Other corner, my other right. And that's something that my board always asks me about, are the website visits. And so that was an easy way to share that. I also wanted to make sure that I remembered to include our logo. I have not always been the best at being consistent in putting that on, so I include that now in all of my reports. So each one of these graphs or areas on the chart indicate another portion of information that I'm trying to share. I don't want to make it hard for people to find certain information that they're looking for. You also need to use your colors strategically. One thing that I learned at this is that you do not want to put green and red together. For those that have vision issues or are colorblind, that would be a horrible way of trying to share information with them. So I used more earthy tones in this. I stayed away from fluorescent, and I was mindful of the combinations of color that I used. Other guidelines are you want to keep it simple. So the KISS method, show, don't tell, and again, be aware of your colors and your fonts. I've also realized that with some of my younger staff, when I'm sharing information, I wouldn't want to use some sort of cursive font because a lot of them really are not familiar with cursive, so I tend to stay away from that. The next slide, please. So you can use statistics like I did in the previous slides to share the story, but then taking those statistics and experiences and building them into a verbal way of sharing your story is also a great opportunity as well. The next slide, please. And we learned this with Jamie LaRue, who at the time was part of the, oh, now I'm going to screw it up. I can't remember which department with the
intellectual freedom.
Thank you. With the American Library Association. And so we practiced actually telling our verbal story, which sometimes is really scary when you're trying to share a lot of information like that. So his recommendation was to use a real person, or if you do make up some sort of story, base it on something that's relatable. So you want to identify a person or a group of people, then you want to state the problem or the issue. Then how did the library intervene? What was done? Was it a service that was implemented? Did you have a program or an event? And then you want to state some sort of a fact, some sort of result, something that you can really stand on that is concrete. And then you want to use a phrase that pays, something that will stick in their mind. So I'm going to share with you, in the next slide, a personal example from our library, and I'm going to read it to you. Mimi is a lonely senior citizen. Mimi uses the computer every day to play endless amounts of solitaire. She has done this for years. She doesn't typically check out books. The library has a partnership with the Senior Connection. Laura, our outreach librarian, goes to the center and leads a book discussion once a month. And then she stays for lunch. Mimi also goes to the center for lunch, but has not participated in the book discussion. On her next visit to the library, after seeing and visiting with Laura at the center, Mimi checked out the next book for the discussion. She couldn't stop talking about how excited she was to participate. Mimi sat down in a comfy chair and began to read and didn't spend her whole afternoon playing solitaire. She also wasn't cranky with the kids during that time. Now she encourages all of the seniors to attend the discussions and utilize the library. Mimi is happier and more engaged with her community. The Institute of Museum and Library Services states that 42% of older adults visit their local libraries at least once a week. Libraries transform communities. So you can see in this example, if we go back a screen, my real person was Mimi. And the problem was she was lonely and cranky, irritable, took up all the computer time in the afternoon away from the kids, complained about the kids. So what did we do? We encouraged her to participate in a book discussion. I stated a fact in my story that 42% of older adults visit the local library, and my phrase that pays was, libraries transform communities. And I've included a link in this to that information if you'd like to give it a try. It's very important for libraries and librarians to tell our story. And so this is an easier way, I think, to do that, and a simple format to follow. And it could be transferred between experiences and situations and libraries. We all have stories to tell. And if you'll advance again, please. One more. I'm going to try and put this all together for us. We're winding down our time here. So if you want to connect with others interested in public library data and evolution, you can join the Ripple online community of practice. It's open to all and not just people who have gone to a Ripple conference. Let's see. They also offer quarterly webinars. So the next one is upcoming on May 23rd, and I apologize, I neglected to see what the topic will be. But it's always something that you can learn from. It's simple and engaging. And then there's discussion forums, which I've kept my eye on a couple of times, and there's actually one experience in there that someone shared about a survey in gathering that information that I'm going to take a look at just to get another perspective of what another library or librarian has done. There's also opportunities for file sharing, and I know that some people have utilized this. Peter Bromberg from the Salt Lake Library told me that he had put some stuff in there, so I can go back and refer to it and not have to rely on either notes that I took or didn't take, and then also refer to those things that he's already created. I know that there will be a pre-conference at ARSL upcoming in September, so that's another opportunity if you're going to ARSL to take advantage of that. And then there will be Ripple, Montana in October of this year, so that'll be a large conference and another great opportunity. At first I was like, oh wow, this is a lot of information, and it can be sometimes easy to get bogged down in that information, so you always have that support, whether it be online or with your other colleagues who have been. So I highly recommend that you take advantage of going to something where you get a little bit more hands-on with the Ripple program. So at this time, if there's any questions, we'll go ahead and take those. And if there's anything else that my colleagues would like to insert here, please feel free to unmute yourself and speak up.
This is Gretchen. I agree, Leanne. I think it felt a little overwhelming, but also exciting. And it's been helpful for me to think about all of these tools like tools in a toolbox, and that you don't use every tool for every job, but being able to think about which is the appropriate one for the job that you're working on today has been helpful for me to just to build a bigger toolbox of resources.
Absolutely. Tammy, do we have any questions?
I am not seeing any. From Tara, it says that she attended the Ripple in Utah earlier this month, and it was well worth attending. That's good to hear. Those of you that are from an Idaho library that are listening, If you have not attended a Ripple conference or training before and you're interested in the Montana training, you could apply for first-time conference funds to help pay your way there. So if you are interested in that, just contact me after this webinar. But the panel's here for another minute or two. If you have any questions for them, just go ahead and type it in the chat box.
Tammy, could you take us to the last screen, please?
Yes. Oh, good. And here are all of the contacts from your lovely presenters today. Sawyer is thanking you all for an excellent presentation. And I, in the chat box earlier, listed the link to the Idaho Commission's webinar website, and you'll find these slides and an archive of this later on today. So you're welcome to check back there or send any of your colleagues that direction. One last call for questions, anyone?
I'd like to thank everyone for coming and spending an hour of your valuable time with us and listening to what we had to say about this great, about Ripple and how wonderful it is. And again, thanks to the Commission for the support.
Well, I second that. I really appreciate the Commission's support to attend this. I found that it was really useful, much more so than most conferences that I attend, which are really fun and interesting, but I often don't leave with like very specific, like do this and then do this. I love the fact that this was really clear and almost prescriptive, and these are the things that you can do to improve your library.
Well, Kate, we were having so much fun at the end of Ripple that, remember, I did miss my flight home.
That was true. That's because we were all in the Mexican restaurant.
Well, that is a lot of fun. Well, thank you so much, the four of you, for sharing your information, and it was really helpful to see some specific examples of what you're doing in your libraries. So, I wish you all well. Hope you're having a sunny time in your part of the state or country. Also, I think my colleague Dylan wanted to make a quick announcement if he's still there. Are you there, Dylan? Dylan, we cannot hear you.
Thank you, Tammy. Very quick announcement for those of you that are in Idaho, working at any Idaho library. There are 3 days left to apply for our amazing Idaho Libraries Futures Camp. That's going to be a summer camp happening this summer. If you work or are a trustee for any Idaho library, do feel free to apply. There's more information on the Commission's website about that, but the application deadline is this Wednesday, the 20th.
All right. Thank you, Dylan. Hopefully we'll see most of you at the Futures Camp. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.